The year was 383 AD. Along the banks of the Fei River in central China, a wall of spears stretched as far as the eye could see. This was the greatest assembly of human force the medieval world had ever witnessed. Nearly 1 million men. Fu Jian, the emperor of the former Qin, looked out over his vast camps and boasted that his soldiers were so numerous that if they all threw their whips into the Yangtze River, it would stop the flow of the water. He was the master of a continent. He had conquered the northern plains, the mountain fortresses, and the Silk Road. Now, only a small remnant of the old world stood in his way. Across the water, 80,000 southern soldiers waited in silence. They were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. To every observer at the time, the result was a mathematical certainty. The South would fall, the dynasty would end. China would be unified under the iron sword of the North. But within a few hours, the world's largest army would not just be defeated, it would be shattered into pieces, not by the strength of the enemy's blade, but by the weight of its own terror. Today, we go inside the Battle of Fei River to see how 80,000 elite warriors used a single tactical lie to trigger the most devastating panic in military history. To understand why the Fei River became a graveyard for the North, you have to grasp the two military systems that were about to collide. The former Qin war machine was a titan with feet of clay. On paper, it was unstoppable. Fu Jian had spent decades building an empire that stretched from the borders of Korea to the deserts of the West. But his army was a fragile coalition. It was made up of Tibetans, Mongols, Turks, and conquered Han Chinese. Many of these soldiers had been fighting against Fu Jian only years before. This wasn't a unified national army. It was a pressurized container of forced loyalty and conscripted peasants. Their logistics were a nightmare. Moving 900,000 men required a supply line that drained the resources of the entire North. Their command structure was bloated and slow. In a pre-modern world without radio or instant communication, managing 1 million men in a single valley was an impossible task. Fu Jian relied on the sheer psychological weight of his numbers. He believed that no army could stand against the sight of an endless horizon of banners. It was the doctrine of the steamroller. The Eastern Jin represented something entirely different. They were the Bei Fu army. These weren't conscripts dragged from their farms. They were the sons of refugees, elite professional warriors, who had fled the North generations ago when the nomads first invaded. For them, this wasn't just a war for an emperor, it was a war for their very existence. They were the guardians of the last light of southern civilization. They were trained specifically for the marshes, rivers, and humid heat of the south. Their equipment was superior, their spears longer, and their armor better suited for the terrain. Most importantly, their chain of command was tight and based on family loyalty. They were a precision instrument designed to strike a single, fatal blow. While the North brought a mountain, the South brought a diamond-tipped needle. The strategic situation in 383 AD was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Fu Jian was convinced of his own destiny. He had ignored the warnings of his most trusted advisors who told him that the South was united and protected by the Great River. He believed his own propaganda about the whips stopping the water. He marched his vanguard of 250,000 men to the banks of the Fei River, with another 600,000 following in a column that stretched for hundreds of miles. On the other side, the southern grand strategist, Shai Han, remained in the capital playing a game of Go. When news reached him that the massive northern army had arrived, he didn't even look up from the board. This calm was not a sign of indifference. It was a weapon. It signaled to his troops and his people that the North was not a threat to be feared, but a problem to be solved. The two armies faced each other across the Fei River. The North occupied the favorable position on the high bank, preventing the South from crossing. If the Bei Fu army tried to cross under fire, they would be slaughtered in the water. For days, the two forces stared at each other. The North was confident, but they were also cramped. 900,000 men need a lot of space, a lot of water, and a lot of food. The sheer size of the northern army was beginning to turn from an advantage into a logistical cage. That's when Shai Xuan, the field commander of the South, made his move. He sent a messenger to the northern camp with a daring, almost insulting proposal. He said, "You have a massive army, but you are positioned so close to the river that we have no room to land. If you move your troops back just a few hundred yards, it will give us the space to cross. Then we can have a fair fight on open ground and settle the fate of China once and for all." In the northern camp, Fu Jian's generals were suspicious. They smelled a trap. But Fu Jian, blinded by his own sense of superiority, saw a golden opportunity, he thought. "We will agree to move back. As the southern army is halfway across the river, caught in the current and disorganized, we will turn around and charge. We will catch them in the water and turn the Fei River red. It was a classic tactical decision, a plan to hit the enemy while they were vulnerable. But Fu Jian failed to account for the one thing that can destroy a coalition of 900,000 men, the loss of momentum. The order was given. The massive northern line, a wall of men miles wide, began to step back. But here is where the physics of a million-man army became a death trap. In a line that long with dozens of different ethnic groups and so many conscripts who didn't want to be there, the soldiers in the rear didn't know the retreat was a tactical maneuver. They couldn't see the river. They couldn't see the emperor. They only saw the front lines moving away from the enemy. In their minds, there was only one reason an army moves away from the enemy: defeat. At that exact moment, a southern sympathizer inside the northern ranks named Zhu Shu triggered the explosion. He began to scream at the top of his lungs, "The Qin army is defeated!" The Qin army is defeated. In an instant, the tactical retreat turned into a total rout. The scream of Zhu Shu acted like a spark in a room full of gunpowder. The soldiers in the middle and back ranks, already nervous and lacking loyalty to the north, believed the front line had been crushed. They turned and ran. The panic spread like a virus. It moved faster than any horse. The north's greatest strength, its sheer scale, became its final curse because there were so many men packed into the valley. There was nowhere to go. Men were trampled by their own cavalry. The thousands of horses surged through the retreating infantry, crushing their own brothers under their hooves. The southern Bei Fu army didn't wait. They charged across the river with the speed of a lightning strike. They didn't even have to fight a battle in the traditional sense. They didn't face a wall of shields. They faced a sea of backs. They simply chased a fleeing mob. The massacre was absolute. The northern soldiers were so terrified that even the sound of the wind in the trees or the cry of a crane in the night sounded to them like the southern army coming to finish them off. This gave birth to the famous phrase, "seeing every tree and bush as a soldier." The panic was so deep that soldiers died of heart failure or exhaustion before a southern blade ever touched them. Fu Jian himself was wounded by an arrow and barely escaped the carnage. He fled back to the north with only a handful of followers. Of his 900,000 men, the vast majority were killed, captured, or simply disappeared into the wilderness. The former Qin Empire, which had taken 30 years to build, collapsed into a dozen warring states within months. The dream of a unified North-South empire was buried in the mud of the Fei River. The strategic implications of this one afternoon rippled through history for centuries. The Eastern Jin dynasty was saved, ensuring that southern Chinese culture, art, and philosophy would survive and flourish for another 200 years. This period of stability allowed the South to develop its own unique identity, separate from the nomadic-influenced North. The Battle of Fei River proved a fundamental truth of warfare. An army is not just a collection of bodies. It is a structure of belief. If that belief is shattered, the numbers don't matter. It was the ultimate victory of morale over mass, of precision over weight. Fu Jian's mistake was the mistake of every overextended empire in history. He believed that quantity has a quality of its own, but he forgot that quantity also has a chaos of its own. He built a machine so big that he couldn't control its heartbeat. The Bei Fu army, though small, had a single heartbeat. When they struck, they didn't just hit the enemy's body, they hit the enemy's mind. The panic that ended the Qin dynasty remains a haunting reminder that in the chaos of battle, a single voice crying out a lie can be more powerful than a million spears. It was the day tactical genius turned a retreat into a stampede and a dynasty into a memory. If you want to see how this victory shaped the rise of the southern dynasties and the eventual reunification of China under the Sui, watch this next video. Subscribe for more battles where brilliant strategy changed the course of history.